Okay, we're going to start talking about derivatives. The year is broken down into really three main topics: limits, which we've done; derivatives, which will be the rest of this semester; and then integrals, which will be the rest of the next semester. So we're going to start derivatives, and we're going to kind of do some conceptual stuff first, so you can understand like an idea of what's happening, and then we'll get into the algebra and how do you actually, work out the math problems. But you're going to have to understand graphs and actually the general idea of what's happening too. So we're going to get into all that. So derivative is the slope of a function or a graph. It's really that simple. There's a very complicated way to explain this that I can go through in class if you want, but I'm going to go through kind of a simpler way here. If I have a function that, goes like that, and I asked you for the derivative at, let's say, 1. What I envision there, what I think the easiest thing to think about there is if you go to x equals 1, find the graph. If you imagine there was a dude surfing on that graph at that spot, like this is a big wave, and he's surfing, and you want the line that we're going to draw here as what's called the tangent line, or the slope, to have the same slope as the curve at that spot. So there's a little dude here surfing on it, and right now this graph at this point would have a positive derivative because his surfboard has a positive slope, or is pointing upwards. If I asked you for the derivative at x equals 3, well, now if I draw that little surfboard that goes right next to the line we're on, it's pointing down, so the derivative here would have a negative slope. At a spot like here, our derivative would be 0, because this surfboard is horizontal, perfectly straight across, so that has a slope of 0. So if you just think in general of positive, negative, or 0, the slope of this graph is positive here, so we'd have a positive derivative. The slope is 0, so we'd have a derivative of 0. The slope is negative all the way down to here, so we'd have a negative derivative over that part. Derivative or slope of 0, and then a positive derivative there. Now that also goes with the idea of, is the graph itself positive or negative? So the graph itself being positive or negative just talks about whether we are above the axis or below the axis. So let's say that in part A I ask you to find spots. Let's say this function is called g of x, and find where g of x is positive and g prime of x is also positive. G prime means derivative. So I want to find a part of this graph where both of these things are true. This means the function itself, or the graph itself, is above the x-axis. So right now it could only be between 0 and 4, or between 6 and infinity. This means the derivative has to be positive. So within those parts that we're already limited to looking at above the axis, within those parts, where would the surfboard also be pointing upwards? Or where is the slope positive? Or where is this graph that we're looking at increasing? Would be, that might be, so that's probably 2. So from 0 to 2, and from 6 to infinity. Because in those two spots, this graph is above the axis, and it's going further above the axis. Above the axis and getting more above the axis. All right, what if I said I want g of x to be negative and g prime of x to be negative. So I want them both to be below I want them both to be negative. So this means we need to be below the axis. So the only spot on this graph that we can look at now is between 4 and 6. Then I want the derivative to be negative. That means I want the surfboard to be negative. I want the slope to be negative. I want the graph to be decreasing. And that happens between 4 and, I don't know, let's say like 5.1. So the only answer here would be from 4 to 5.1. What if I asked for g is positive and g prime is negative? Now so this means my original graph is supposed to be positive. So the y values are positive, so we're above the axis. So again, we're cutting off like this bottom part here. Now within those parts up there, where is the graph decreasing? Or where would the surfboard be pointing down? Or where is the slope negative? Those are all the same thing. So if I look between 2 and 4, I am above the axis, but I'm also decreasing. And that's it. The only other time we're above the axis over here, we are actually increasing. All right, so that's one thing you're going to have to look at tonight is determining where the derivative is positive or negative, which has to do with the slope, and then where the function is positive or negative, which has to do with just the y value. Okay, the second thing you're going to have to do is, and we'll practice all of this stuff in class again tomorrow too, is the equation of a tangent line. So the equation of any line in general